Millions of frontline workers keep our economy running and are provided with the latest technology to do their jobs. But digital adoption, especially by frontline workers, is really hard.
This is Frontline Innovators. We explore how to overcome challenges and achieve success when we empower our essential workers.
I'm Justin Lake.
And I'm Gene Signorini. Together, we speak with experts who are leading the way and driving digital transformation to the front line.
This podcast is sponsored by Skillful, on a mission to help frontline workers learn and use the technology needed to succeed in their jobs. I'm your host, Justin Lake, and I'm super excited for today's episode. Today's guest has over 20 years combined experience in change management, communications, and public relations. He's a member of the Association of Change Management Professionals and is ProSci certified in organizational change management. He's currently a change manager at Lowe's. Please welcome to the show, Ken White. Hey, Ken.
Hey, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Very well, and I'm really excited to have you on the show today. And as we always do in the show, I want to start off and ask you what you feel is the biggest challenge facing the deskless workforce today.
I believe, based on my experience, that would be technology-driven change saturation. For any number of reasons, be it to improve communications, to improve sales, improve on-the-job safety, to streamline how frontline workers do their jobs. Technology-driven changes are coming out fast and furious. And this is some feedback that I have received from those internal clients that I have. And we have to remember that frontline workers have sort of a double whammy, if you will, in the area of change saturation. They not only have to embrace the technology-driven changes, but the regular corporate changes that come down the pike, whether that be adhering to some government regulations or organizational restructuring. So they've got two buckets that they have to deal with.
Well, you're in the right place to talk about this because I think a lot of the people that would be listening, and I certainly agree that technology-driven change saturation is a big challenge for the men and women. And so you've already brought up a bunch of topics that I want to come back to and really explore a little bit further. But before we do that, I'd like our audience to get a little bit of better understanding of who you are and how you came into the role that you have today. So take us back as far in your background as you feel comfortable and tell us how you ended up where you're at today.
Well, a long, long time ago in a faraway land of Nashville, Tennessee.
I thought you were going to say in a galaxy far, far away.
In a galaxy far, far away. In 2006, I became a member of a Tennessee Department of Human Services statewide initiative to bring all their workers online so that in all 90 counties they could work collaboratively, that the public would only have to fill out forms once because all counties could share that information. Whereas before it was a lot of manual work, that they were on a mainframe system set up. It was just antiquated. And so I was made, based on my communications experience, as well as public relations experience, the communications and change readiness manager. So that was my introduction to the change management basics outside of communications, because as we all know, communications is kind of like the backbone of change management. But it was kind of a lot of on-the-job training. From there, I had any number of contracts in change management in industries that span from automotive to healthcare, to, again, government services. And then I landed my first full-time change management job at Duke Energy in customer delivery. Customer delivery is the largest department at Duke Energy. And basically, those are the folks out in the field, in the bucket trucks that you see, all those folks reading meters. That's customer delivery, taking care of issues, setting up new lines, setting up new meters. I worked there for a couple of years, and I think we'll touch upon it later on. But in the last 1.5 years, about 2 years, I was put on a very exciting project called Lighthouse, which was Duke Energy's digital transformation initiative. And then I was offered my current position at Lowe's in Lowe's Technology. So I am the change manager for Lowe's Technology for both the United States and India. And that's the long and short of it.
That's fantastic. So what was it about change management that drew your interest in that direction?
Change management, in between all those contracts and change management, because of my writing skills and analysis skills, I did some technical writing contracts, some business analyst contracts, and full-time employment. And I enjoyed that work, but I began thinking of what is really at the heart of what I want to do when I grow up. And change management seemed to fit the bill of being able to tie in my communication skills, my public relations skills, my writing skills, working with influencers and leadership to get initiatives over the line or sway others to help us get initiatives over the line. So change management brought together many of the tenets of my background in one nice job title.
Yeah. You've got a degree in communications, so that's been kind of an underlying theme of everything that you've been doing in your career. So it kind of makes sense. When you sought that degree, did you imagine ending up in a role like this, or did you have something different in mind?
I had something different in mind, actually, but it plays into what I'm doing today. I had in mind working in television and film. After college with my degree, I wound up working in broadcast radio and had a boutique television advertising company. And so what is the ties to change management there? Well, in change management, we're influencing, we're selling, we're making people feel positive about what we're rolling out to them. We have to listen as we're writing the scripts, listen to what works, what doesn't work. And so, that work ties into what I'm doing today. But coming out of the gate, I had those ambitions to work in television and film. The biggest job I had in film was I was an assistant director on an independent feature film that was shot in the Washington, D.C. area. So I really didn't go down that road too far. Then when I moved from Washington, D.C., having done the broadcast radio and television advertising, when I moved to Nashville, I sought to do the same type of work, but I found out that Nashville was a big, small town. And if you didn't grow up there or have family there, it's very hard to break into the system. And that's where all those contracts started coming in. I just thought, well, because I started getting contacted by recruiters for contracts. And so that's how that all got started. And then again, as I said earlier, it all parlayed into what I'm doing today.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, that's an exciting background. I appreciate you sharing with that to give us some context there. So tell us a little bit. You mentioned Project Lighthouse at Duke specifically. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that project, because I think your story about Project Lighthouse will probably cover a couple of the topics that we would normally talk about. So why don't you just start off telling a little story about what happened with that project?
Well, it was really funny how I began that project. I'll tell you that funny story before I tell you about Lighthouse. But back to this change, saturation, and things moving so fast. I know it's not just unique to Duke Energy, to Lowe's. It's almost every company is becoming a digital company,
Mm-hmm.
as many and many of your listeners know, I'm sure. So I was wrapping up another initiative at Duke Energy and tying a nice bow on it, and got a phone and said, well, we're putting you on a project called Lighthouse. And, you know, we need you to jump in like real quick. And I said, well, what is real quick? And it's like, well, in 10 minutes, they're launching.
10 minutes.
You need to go across the street, go to XYZ board, meeting room, and take part in the launch.
And no, it's not an option.
And no, it was not an option. So I picked up my pen and my writing pad and my laptop and sat in on the launch of Lighthouse. Basically, Lighthouse is Duke Energy's flagship initiative to digitally transform itself. And it was a project where they gutted out an old warehouse here in Charlotte, and they put a lot of neon inside, a lot of polished wood floors. Think Silicon Valley, right?
Yeah.
Then they took the best and the brightest, not saying that I was one of those, but somehow I fell into it. The best and the brightest from the development teams across Duke Energy to represent every department, from HR to legal to supply chain to customer delivery. And they put these teams under one roof, set them up to work in agile methodologies to develop products. And the products that they built, here's an interesting aspect. The way that products moved down the road was that every 8 weeks, kind of like Shark Tank, an agile team had to come before a board and pitch what they wanted to do with this product for the next 8 weeks. It got a thumbs up or a thumbs down, right? So there's these constant pitches, which made for a very dynamic, environment. But this is called metered funding. If you got to a point where they said, okay, product's good, we don't want to go any further, we hear you, but let's call this done. Then it didn't go any further. So every 8 weeks, you had to pitch your ideas to the board to get that funding to go for the next 8 weeks. So we have our agile teams from every department under one roof, best and the brightest, working collaboratively. Even also under that roof were communities of practice. I was involved in a Lighthouse change management community of practice. So a lot of innovation going on, a lot of collaboration going along, a lot of knowledge transfer and share going on. It was quite dynamic. And during my time there, I either worked on or was around 4 or 5 products that we developed for customer delivery.
That's fantastic. So when you think about the challenge, I mean, I know this is going back, the Project Lighthouse story, dates back a few years, or at least your involvement of it. But when you think about your experiences then and how you started off the conversation about the amount of technology driven change saturation, what are some of the best practices you can share with us that you learned from that experience about being in the middle of such a major transformational initiative and yet still having to deal with the human element of adoption of that change?
Well, some of the best practices I would say would be never stop listening to your customer or the end user,
Mm-hmm.
because you're there to develop products that will make their life easier and create business value, right? Some of the other best practices I would say which was enforced at Lighthouse, is a die-hard commitment to no idea is a bad idea. So there was a great environment of freedom to speak up with your thoughts as we work through this current 8 weeks or the next 8 weeks, what we want this product to be. I don't know if it actually falls into the realm of best practices, but I would definitely say some of those things that made for our good experiences, that we had our senior leadership on board. They were all in alignment with what we were doing. and they dedicated the resources necessary to get the job done. So those were two main tenets, leadership buy-in, dedicated resources. Those were two main tenets that made the whole thing successful.
Yeah. What did you, or what was it about the culture that allowed to have such great leadership buy-in? It sounds like that was a pretty important element as you were telling that story. Is there anything in particular that
I
you can
think
remember?
that the leadership was a bunch of just smart folks, and they could see down the road, and they knew that every company needs to leverage digital technology to succeed in the future.
Yeah.
So their starting place was a place of knowing clearly what the future had in hand as far as growth and success.
Yeah. No, I think that's encouraging. And I think a lot of customers or companies, I should say, are transitioning over to really thinking of themselves or rethinking of themselves as a digital organization, even though that may not be, their primary function. They're not Google and, they're not Apple, but, many companies now have to be really digital first, including utility companies, right? So that makes a lot of sense. That the part that I'm encouraged by is to hear in the story that you're sharing, the emphasis of and support for change management, to have a team and to be as thoughtful and deliberate about how you were going to bring this innovation into the organization. That part's pretty impressive.
Right. It was very impressive and rewarding for me. Layered onto the change management aspect was a totally new concept to me, which I'm so glad I was a part of, was design thinking. And so I needed to, back to your best practices, I would definitely say finding a way to work as a change manager in a constructive way on a development team with design thinking leads is very important, because some of the tenets of design thinking, empathy maps, for instance, cross over into standard change management practices. So I know personally, I had to sit down with the design thinking lead on these projects and say, okay, your empathy map, really, I get a lot of that in my stakeholder impact analysis. So as not to wear our development team down with double work, how do we combine what you do, what I do, et cetera, et cetera? So that plays into the collaboration. Again, of the whole Lighthouse Initiative, just the pace and the goals and the mission and the people and the profile of the people on the teams just needed collaboration to be a success.
You mentioned empathy maps, and that's a concept I don't think a lot of people are aware of. Could you describe a little bit more about empathy maps and their purpose and how you used them in that scenario?
Sure, I can. Empathy maps are a nice way of combining both the technical aspect of a worker and their job role and their personal side. So basically, an empathy map, we take your typical job role, say line technician, right? And we divide it up into 4 categories. And as a development team, we talk about this line, the typical line technician, and we talk about what the line tech is thinking, what they're actually doing on their job on a daily basis, what they're feeling about what they're doing, and what they're saying about what they do and the organization. So what is that thinking, feeling, saying, and doing? And really, it's just a laundry list. Oh, linemen, here's what they're saying about their job and how this is how it ties into the product that we're developing. Here are the pain points that we are going to remove based on what they're thinking, saying, feeling, and doing. So that's in a nutshell, empathy mapping it. It's just a deeper dive into the persona of the frontline worker.
I love it. And how does that then? So actually, I should go back one step. How are you collecting that data? Is that something that the change team is coming into a room and populating that on their own, or are you sitting down with a focus group of users? Talk to me a little bit about how that's handled.
Well, that's a good question, and all of the above. We began our process by sitting down as a team in a room, and those people around the table were very familiar with the workers that we were developing products for, and we would create a beta version of an empathy map, if you will, right? Then we would go out into the field in discovery meetings and talk directly with workers to see if what we thought they were saying, I can't tell you the number of things I learned by sitting around a table 15 minutes before a scheduled meeting was to occur, having coffee with 2 or 3 workers to validate what they're thinking.
And did it validate what you had in your map, or did
many times it did, because again, our starting point, back to the getting the best and the brightest to work on these teams under one roof. Many of the folks on the development teams had years of experience at Duke, and they had a pretty good idea. But between the two, we started out with our beta version, if you will, a baseline, and then we went out to validate whether what we thought about the workers was true. And then we would come back and revise not only the empathy maps, but we would do some revision of our initial thoughts around the product features. Because you definitely don't want to develop something that people don't want.
Yeah. So did the empathy maps only feed into the design and the development of the technology, or did you take that further into training and change communication and things like that?
Most definitely. Most definitely. We use that to develop our communications, which, basically the backbone of the communications, as you know, is beginning with awareness, explaining the why of what we're doing, and again, to the training. It definitely, an interesting part about the training is that while we were in the field on these discovery meetings, we identified key influencers that would carry our messages to the boots on the ground folks, as well as that would help us with our training initiatives. So those discovery meetings had several different purposes, but yes, we use that information in all of the tenets of change management to include sponsor engagement. We got to meet the leaders in leadership in the field, listen to them, figure out how we would work with them based on what we were hearing from the workers, how we would ask them to be active and visible, how to communicate our messages based on what we've heard and what we need people to know. So yeah, every aspect of the change management life cycle, we use that information.
My favorite part of what you just described, the empathy maps, are the ones that are maybe a little bit more abstract, which is what does he or she think and what does he or she feel? I think that's something that I've become increasingly sensitive to as we think about how to build and support and train for technology solutions with the front lines. I've been fortunate to be out in the field and had some feedback. And a story that I'm sure my team is tired of me telling them is one time that I was out with a delivery driver, and he was actually using words like stressed and anxiety and frustrated in telling me about how he felt about the tech transformation that was coming down the pipe. And I was so thankful of how self-aware he was and how comfortable he was sharing his feelings about it. And I had a moment that day that I'll never forget, where I realized, there have probably been hundreds of other frontline workers that I've come into contact with that maybe just didn't explain themselves as clearly as that guy did that day. But I bet many of them were feeling the same way. And until we, really consider the emotional side of that, it's not just about, the tools that they're using and the equipment that they're operating and stuff like that, but it is also about how they feel about those changes. So I love that you have a framework for how to map that out and make sure that it's being, considered for all phases of your transformation.
Right. And I can tell you that going out in the field in the discovery meetings, how much goodwill that created,
Yeah.
that we would care, because back to the deskless frontline workers, often they feel voiceless, and often they um, are not even aware of what corporate's going on, or that corporate would take the time to come out to talk to them. So back to that, the discovery meetings in the field played into the change management. We built trust by going out to the field as well, which
Yeah.
is very important.
Yes, I think that's something that's really overlooked a lot of times, is the relationship. Several of our guests have talked about this in a variety of different terms, but what it boils down to is um, the relationship value that comes from getting out in the field, asking questions, showing that you actually care about their input. You mentioned earlier in our conversation today about, there's no idea is a bad idea, and having the freedom to speak up, and that ought to extend all the way out to, the men and women on the front line, so that they can be contributors and actually bring them in to be a part of the process as early as is practical in your
That's
project.
right. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So let's shift a little bit. I know you're in retail now, and this all of these segments have been affected by the pandemic over we're coming up on 2 years now, which is crazy. How do you think frontline workers have been affected by the pandemic and being a part of the global economy while all of this has been kind of hitting the fan?
Well, I've touched upon it before, how they've been affected by the pandemic is every company, I believe, is thinking, how do we get our jobs done using technology? It gets back to that technology-driven change saturation.
Yeah, how you opened the conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, because of the pandemic, business processes are changing. I know at Lowe's, um, we're having to, when we introduce curbside service and lockers, and being able to check out in aisle 26 with an associate and their handheld device, um, that they're having to, because of the pandemic, adopt all these new technologies that are keeping the customers happy, driving sales. So again, it's what I opened up with. I would also say that they're on a more personal note, that they're having to think about their own personal safety,
Mhm.
and keeping their families safe. And I know that we have s- you know promoted following guidelines that we put out there, and then people have their own personal list of tactics that they use. But yeah, I would say also, because of the pandemic, a new set of customer service skills has had to be learned.
Mhm.
Because customers have gotten used to fast, quick, easy, in large part because of technology. And if something goes wrong with their technology and they need to come into the store, or whatever, the associate needs to try as hard as possible to give them that fast, easy, um, you know, shopping experience. So they've had to learn new skills. So there's many different ways that the because of COVID, that COVID has introduced. They've also had to learn um, how to be agile
Yeah.
and change direction, and to troubleshoot if something is not going right, because many plans are being developed and implemented in what normally would take 6 months to a year within 2 or 3 weeks. So when it's rolled out and something goes wrong, and our associates, our frontline workers, need to stay positive, and they need to check and adjust. So that's a new skill set for many of our workers.
Yeah, and it's interesting as you describe it as a new skill set. I was thinking about the job descriptions of those roles, probably, at least historically, didn't include a lot of the things that you just described, right? It probably never said technical troubleshooting as part of your job requirement. But the reality is, over the last year and a half, that's become, a necessary part of their role.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And I did touch upon, some of we have different business processes based on different protocols that we have to follow. So it's just a whole new world that that has been introduced by the pandemic.
I think your segment of retail was, particularly impacted in that, I know all aspects of retail have been impacted. So if there are any other retailers out there, I'm not saying that you had it easier. But, when you look at the home improvement retail segment, all of us that were working from home, we're out there, repairing our homes and, going into overdrive on home improvement projects. So your business was actually up at the same time, you were dealt, the same challenge that a lot of other industries had to face, which is all the new processes and everything you're talking about. And I love that you opened the conversation with the change saturation, because I do think everybody had to change to adapt to the new processes. But at the same time, companies like yours were using technology as part of that process change, right? So it was just a whirlwind of things happening all at the same time. And I think a lot of that is still underway today.
Yeah, yes, it is. And it's requiring, new commitment from all workers. It's requiring more clear, concise, relevant communications to explain the what, the why, and the how. I know that our learning and development department is busy creating learning modules for this, that, and the other. It's just work on steroids for the
Yeah.
past 2 years.
Well, that actually brings me to another question, and maybe you were starting to go down this path in referring to your colleagues on the L&D side of the house. But are there any tools that you're using, maybe new tools that you're using now, to facilitate change and learning and communication inside the organization? So not the end technology that you're trying to implement, but other tools that you're using to help with the implementation of that?
You mean the products that we develop, or just developing your skill set in technology in general?
Yeah. So what tools are you using to communicate? Are you using any different tools for training than you were using in the past? Any of those things that are enabling technologies versus the actual enterprise tool itself?
Well, to tell you the truth, I don't know that I can give you a robust answer on that, because our learning and development department is so great that they just take care of it from A to Z.
That's awesome.
They have an intake session with us, and they come back to us, and with the training modules, I can't really tell you what software they use, or trying anything differently. I can tell you that we have at Duke Energy, we developed back to mobile technology. We did develop micro learning opportunities that folks could do in the field on their phones. And so that was definitely something that we try to do. And I'm pretty sure that we do it at Lowe's as well.
Yeah.
But really, I am their customer, L&D,
Awesome.
and they're fantastic. So yeah, can't really go any further as far as any tools that L&D uses.
Okay.
I know to improve skills, we have a very robust array of modules offered by Pluralsight. I don't know if you've ever heard of Pluralsight, but that gets to just developing your skills as a software engineer, etc.
Right.
As a business analyst, project manager, etc.
Okay. No, that's really good. And I like to keep, the show mostly on the positive side. But I do think it's helpful that we learn from maybe some things that didn't go as well as we had hoped. And I'm curious if you can think of any examples where maybe you tried to implement something from a change leadership standpoint that maybe it didn't go badly, but it just didn't go exactly the way that you thought. Are there any experiences that come to mind that you can share with us?
Well, one comes to mind pretty immediately, and that was at Duke Energy. And I think it was, I have a note here. I think it was either on a new damage assessment app, I believe, but it was on an app to help our line technician. Either it could have been the smart meter project where the line worker could just scan the meter and it would create a ticket, enter all the data, and it solved a big problem of fat fingering manually the information from a meter. So it was either the damage assessment tool or the smart meter project where we got way down the road until we found out that the third party system, SS9, would not support what we were doing.
Oh, good grief.
Which entered into several months of trying to figure out workarounds. So the takeaway here is that when you're going into developing a product, you really need to ensure that all of your back-end systems and especially your third-party systems will support what you're developing. And whatever initiative that was, it was put on the shelf after several months. But this is the beauty about that environment, the beauty about Duke Energy leadership and Lighthouse in general, is that the motto "fail and fail fast" was not only spoken, but it was modeled.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people could have gotten upset over that. But to leadership's credit, to the product development team's credit, we woke up, pulled up our big boy pants, our big girl pants, and got busy on the next project the next day.
Yeah. I love that. I love the spirit of the idea of failing fast. I know it's mostly semantics, but I hate the term itself because I feel like there's such a negative connotation around failing,
right?
And rather than
it's discovery, really,
right? It's a discovery and learning process, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we make a mistake and we don't learn from it, yes, that's a failure. If we make a mistake and learn and adapt and iterate on that, then I don't think failure has, that word doesn't have a place in the spirit of what we're trying to do there, right? But I get the gist of that, and I absolutely love that approach. And I think one of the things that a lot of our guests have talked about in the show is about when there has been a project in the past that didn't go as successfully as everybody thought that it would, that it creates a bit of kind of mental scar tissue for the upcoming projects, right? And I'm wondering if you faced any of that in the scenario that you were describing, where because you'd had a failed experiment or a failed project in the past, when you tried to go implement your next change, was there any pushback from the affected people that said, oh, well, last time you guys came out here to roll out technology, it never made it all the way, so we spent all this time and energy and it never happened? Did you ever get any pushback after that?
Well, I've experienced those scenarios often throughout my career.
Yeah.
Which is why one of the first activities as a change manager I do is to do a change characteristics assessment. In other words, what is the change? How many people does it affect? Is it complex or easy? And then an organizational attributes assessment in which we ask how much change is going on currently? Has any past changes failed? Was leadership behind the change? Are they change management savvy? And so as part of that exercise, we discover where a change was attempted and it did not go well. And that arms us to drop that into our risk mitigation plan and begin as a team developing plans to address that. That is so at the heart of that, when something has not gone well, that is where it's more important than ever to recruit a change agent network
Yep.
comprised of key influencers, folks that people trust, because we're dealing with the trust factor in large part in those situations. So we have to identify the trust factors. Then we need our senior leadership to come out strong. First of all, actually, I'm on a project right now at Lowe's where I strongly suggested that it's not that previous attempts at what we're currently doing went bad. It's just that we've done it and there were multiple flavors.
Yeah.
So that's another scenario where there's been multiple flavors of this flavor. And so I strongly suggested we have to acknowledge that we know that we've rolled similar things out. So being transparent, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
That's my favorite part of what you just said is the transparency, right? Acknowledging to them that, hey, it's not like we're coming out here with a slightly different flavor and we're naive to the fact that this is only slightly different than what you've seen before, right? We get it. We know it. Here are the reasons why, and to go all the way back. But you've spoken about this several times just in this brief chat that we've had today, which is about trust and the relationship. And I think that transparency only puts you in a position to have, greater trust and an improved relationship. So that's a fantastic way to talk that through. Tell me, what is something that a contribution of yours in any of the roles that you've had that you're most proud of?
Contribution of mine that I'm most proud of. Got to give me one quick second here.
Take your time.
I guess it would be the Lighthouse Initiative and the preparing and training I gave the team I was assigned to in change management. And in essence, the goal was to make everyone change agents. And why I'm most proud of that is because Lighthouse was a very high profile initiative, received national press, and we were looked at in the industry as well as within other industry sectors as a model. So the stakes were high, and at the end of the day, I had not only those that were my clients and those that were my supervisors on the project, but my coworkers themselves tell me that repeatedly that they could not have developed the products that they did or went about the process um, uh, and achieved the same results without the coaching and mentoring and guidance that I gave them. And again, these are people coming from all sectors of the enterprise. I told you I had a 10-minute warning, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't, we were really all put together quickly. We were told to get off the ground quickly. In other words, that 8-week cycle, those started like immediately. So being able to not get in their way, weave myself in and out of the work that they were doing this, just in chunks of learning of how they needed to think about the people side of change, not just the technology side, without getting on their nerves. I had to learn their language of an agile team. Don't dare put together a PowerPoint presentation if it can't go on a Post-it note and stick it on a whiteboard. We don't want to hear what you have to say. So I had to learn their language. It was like coming into a new tribe, if you will.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm most proud of that because customer delivery at the end of the day was recognized out of all of the teams. They were recognized repeatedly as, a group that excelled and exceeded expectations and were publicly acknowledged for that.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a lot to be proud of. As you're telling the story, it was kind of making me think of like a scene in Apollo 13, pulling everybody together as quickly as you can.
Exactly.
To go solve a bunch of high pressure problems as fast as you can. And, in that case, it was life or death. But in your case, it's just a pretty big transformation that a whole team of people were pulled together to solve. And
That's an
awesome.
excellent analogy. It really is. That's how it was. A lot of energy, a lot at stake.
Yeah, that's a great story. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
I know the time always flies when we're having these conversations, and we are coming towards the end. But before we totally wrap up, I'd love to get your take on what's your favorite and least favorite aspects of working with technology.
I guess my favorite aspect of working with technology is that uh, um, I have a solid understanding that technology is the engine that drives businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always liked being where the action is at. And technology, the development of new technologies, is at the heart and soul of most companies. And if it's not, it's rapidly becoming.
Yeah.
So what I don't know if it's initially I don't like about technology, but as a change manager, I feel that it's Groundhog Day. Often in my needing to educate or reinforce and remind technologists and that there is a people side to what they're doing. There is a big emphasis, a lot of producing fast and getting speed to market and all those other buzzwords. But there are individuals we need to take on this journey with us. And so I guess, again, it's not that I don't like it, it's a part of the job. And I do enjoy the mentoring and coaching aspect. But it would be nice if folks arrived, let's call it, arrived at the table the way that my Duke Energy team ended up after months and months of working together and being educated in the people side of change. But that's just not reality.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's man, you just summarized the intent of Frontline Innovators, and really us just raising the awareness of the human element of digital transformation initiatives, and making sure that we're all thinking about that. And we've had a few guests that have talked about the communication and acting as a conduit, not toward the frontline workers out, but actually toward the internal teams, to help give the dev team, for example, and other folks in operations like perspective around a day in the life of the frontline workers, since the change folks seem to kind of sit in the middle as the liaison between those organizations, to help the dev team understand, yes, I know agile is wonderful. I know 2-week sprints make the dev team super efficient, but 2-week sprints are killing the frontline workers because we're changing things, in their day, every day. And it's painful and it's too much change for them to absorb. Right. So having that, bidirectional communication is really paramount to being successful in digital transformation. And that's really what the show is all about. So you did a great job of summarizing that, and I appreciate your insight on that.
Great.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Well, Ken, we need to wrap it up. We've already gone through past our time here, and have really enjoyed the conversation. I hope our guests have enjoyed the conversation as much as I have. If you have, please share and rate the podcast. 5-star ratings help ensure that it gets promoted to other professionals like you that are innovating on the front lines. Remember, the podcast is sponsored by Skillful, the digital adoption platform for deskless and frontline workers. Visit the website at skillful.com, and that's SKYLLFUL.com. And we're always looking for new guests. So if you or someone you know is out there innovating on the front lines, we'd love to hear about it. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn and either share your story or introduce your colleague who may have a great story to share on the podcast, and we'd love to meet them. And we'll see you on the next episode. Ken, thanks again for your time today.